Will friends and social change agents and veterans of the movement and future veterans of social change movements. And when I was hearing everyone who had been part of the SNCC Freedom Summer, so many are still continuing in this legacy work and doing this work right now. We ask you, come on now, folks. Folks, we're just about to start up. We're still waiting for Mr. Bond, but we'll be getting ourselves together. So I find it just exhilarating that people are continuing this work and that there's another generation here who also is continuing this work. So I want to, absolutely, a round of applause for all of you current and past and you future veterans of civil rights, of freedom summer, freedom winter, freedom fall, freedom spring, freedom all around. One of the great lessons of the Freedom Summer was that if you organize, you can change the world. And only if you organize can you change the world. And this panel of change makers is about how one part of the movement supports the other, and only when we work together and overcome some of the kinds of divisions that sometimes occur can we actually really change the world. So this is a session on immigration reform, on civil rights, and labor rights. Oh, you know what? Is it up there? Well, now that's a true organizer. You know something's needed, you run to it. And it's about how each of our movements support each other and what we need to do to build an even stronger movement together. By the way, Friday, June 27th, will have been 1 year to the day that the Senate passed a comprehensive immigration reform bill, and then the House Republicans have done nothing about it, even though a deadline was set by many of the advocates saying that's the deadline. And so it's an example of people standing in the way of that kind of progress, the fight still going on, and this panel in part is going to focus on how each of our struggles need to reinforce each other so we actually fight it through to a victory. And we will win immigration reform. We will, partly because of the victories on immigration reform, once we have that pathway to citizenship, we will have greater victories on worker rights and greater victories on civil rights, reinforcing those on worker rights and reinforcing those on civil rights, and all of us working that together. For this panel, Carmen Berkeley will be our first speaker. She is a powerhouse leader. She is really a one-woman coalition. I first met Carmen when she was the president of United States Student Association, the largest national student association. Then she was the field director of Choice USA, then the regional director of NAACP. Then we worked together on a large march called One Nation Working Together. We survived that.
We did survive.
Because, and it was about for labor rights, for civil rights, for immigration reform, and for a better society. And she's held many different positions, and now she is the Civil Rights Director of the AFL-CIO. And she had said that she's particularly dedicated to attracting the millennials into the labor movement and described herself as an organizer yearning to change the world through politics, training, and developing leaders to create progressive change. Carmen Berkeley.
Thank you.
Cristina Jimenez is co-founder and managing director of United We Dream. In many ways, United We Dream is the moral backbone of the immigration reform movement. The Dreamers are young people who were brought to America by undocumented parents looking for a better life for their families. They lived in a legal limbo. When others thought it wasn't possible to drive ahead on deferred action to prevent their being forced to return to their country of origin, that after so many years they may not have spoken the language, may not have known the people. The Dreamers fought and raised that to the top of the agenda. And President Obama responded and instituted DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Christina herself has organized immigrant youth and workers for passage of the DREAM Act, comprehensive immigration reform, and pro-immigration legislation at all levels. Are you going to tell your story? Oh, I'll leave that there. But I will say that she embodies and helps to lead this struggle on immigration reform with a moral clarity and a compassion and a courage and really movement-building skills uniting all parts of the progressive community. Christina Jimenez. I'm going to introduce Julian Bond, who will be on his way, and he'll be the third speaker. You probably all know something about Julian, but I don't think he was introduced to the whole conference, so I'm going to say a little bit about him, because it may be that another generation does not fully know about him. He truly is a national treasure. When he was a student at Morehouse College in Atlanta in the early 60s, he helped to found the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He's also been the president of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and he spent 4 terms in the Georgia House of Representatives, though he was barred from staying in the House because of his opposition to the war in Vietnam until his case was taken to the Supreme Court and they allowed him to take his seat. He's also been the chairman of the NAACP and has really spoken out on virtually every important position, including very recently on marriage equality and gay and lesbian rights. He hired me in 2000 as the founding director of the NAACP National Voter Fund to help increase African American turnout by nearly 2 million votes. By the way, you remember in 2000 that, and the increase in Florida was by 60% because of the NAACP National Voter Fund. And it's one of the reasons I personally think George Bush and his party thought he had to steal the election. He just recently was part of and spoke for the Fast for Families on immigration reform. He himself combines all these movements together and speaks with a courage that helps raise our spirits and build our power. So I think this is going to be a remarkable panel. I'm Heather Booth. I was a summer volunteer in 1964 and kept on organizing when Dr. King said the way to civil rights is through labor rights. I became a union organizer with a back pay suit I won from union organizing. I started a training center called Midwest Academy. It's still ongoing. And now I run or advise large-scale issue social change campaigns, including the campaign for financial reform that won the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that Elizabeth Warren was advocating, the AFL-CIO's healthcare campaign, and now I'm the strategic advisor to the immigration reform campaign called the Alliance for Citizenship. So I'm looking forward to this panel, and I know you are a remarkable audience. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. We'll have each panelist speak about 8 minutes or so, and then have a few minutes of discussion back and forth, and then we should still have about half hour or 40 minutes for discussion with you in the audience. And for the panelists, we just ask that we move the microphone. You want to start with that one? Speak into the mics. And we'll ask you to, we'll go through the panelists from Carmen, Christina, and then Julian is just come in now. And then we'll go through your questions and also ask for comments as long as they're very brief. Oh, and also the session is being recorded, as you can see. So we ask you to both speak into the microphones and speak clearly and with exciting exchanges.
Yeah.
Carmen Berkeley.
Hi, everyone. So I don't know how many of you saw the big sign that I did not set up myself outside that says labor rights or civil rights. And I was so happy to see that because our department at the AFL-CIO, our slogan is workers' rights are civil rights. And, you know, just to give you a little bit of background, growing up, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and thank you for the clap. And my mother, she always took us to NAACP events. And, you know, she took us there because she wanted for us to be activists and she wanted for us to understand, you know, what activism meant for African Americans. But she also is a flight attendant and is a part of the Association of Flight Attendants, which is a part of the Communication Workers for America. And she always talked about her benefits and collective bargaining. And so those two worlds, at least in my family, always collided because we were never allowed to separate what it meant to work and what work meant for our family, meaning giving us an opportunity to succeed, and then also what it meant to be Black in America and some of the challenges that we deal with. But, you know, because of unions, because of collective bargaining, it allowed for our family to live a different life. When we were sick, we were able to go to the doctor. We were able to pay to go to college because of that good union job. So for me, I always see them as together. But at least for labor, and I think, you know, a lot of times labor gets a bad rap when it comes to, you know, not working with civil rights. We have some incredible civil rights leaders amongst our rank, from A. Philip Randolph, you know, who was a part of the March on Washington. And, you know, if you even look at the signs from the March on Washington, many of them say UAW, United Auto Workers, because they had such a strong, powerful presence, to Mr. Bill Lucy, who I know was here today, who was a part of AFSCME. So we have a long history of working within civil rights. And like I said, the majority of people in America work. And the majority of people in America that don't work would probably like to work. But we can't ever divorce the issues of working people from the issues that people actually deal with, particularly people of color. So in our department, we are really focusing on 4 things. One, we have really taken on what it means to end mass incarceration, because we feel like there is an entire population of people that have served their time and want to work, and we should be giving them opportunities to work. Serve your time, get to work. Of course, the second thing that we're working on is voting rights and making sure that no matter where you live, from Alaska all the way down to Florida, that if you want to vote, you are able to, and if you're an ex-offender, you are also able to, you know, have your right to vote. The third thing is, of course, reforming our immigration laws and stopping deportations. That is a huge issue that we are always at the forefront of. And of course, raising wages for working families, meaning bringing up the minimum wage, not just to $10.10, but to $15 an hour. We need a $19 an hour minimum wage, making sure that we have paid family medical leave. So for us, that is our, you know, going into the 21st century civil rights agenda. All of it is really focused on how do we raise wages, but also how do we protect workers. So specifically as it pertains to immigration and mass incarceration, around immigration, we have really, you know, stood firm on administrative relief and what it means to end deportations. Because for us, we feel like all workers, whether they be immigrants, citizens, undocumented, deserve to have respect and dignity in the workplace, and they need to be able to work in a safe environment. So, you know, we're hearing examples such as employers that are not paying their folks decent wages, or they're not paying their folks at all, and then, you know, when the workers say, hey, you know, this isn't fair, ICE is being called on them, and a lot of these folks are being deported. So for the labor movement, it has been particularly important to protect all workers. Specifically in the South, we have really been focusing on 5 cities: Atlanta, Orlando, Miami, Dallas, and Houston. For us, those are different places where we really want to dig in deep with community organizations and make sure that undocumented folks and immigrants are actually being represented, but also making sure that when people take that step and become citizens, that they have a place where they can have naturalization education, and that the labor movement can be the place to register them to vote. And as it pertains to mass incarceration, we have really been focusing on what does it mean to help people move into trade unions after they've served their time. You know, we all know having a union job means decent pay with decent benefits. And so we know that we will be able to change the economy, and we will be able to change communities if we can help ex-offenders actually work decent jobs that pay good wages. So that is the beginning of our civil rights agenda moving into 2014, 2015.
Can you hear me? Oh, great. How are you all doing?
Doing good.
You're gonna enjoying this panel. I'm really honored to be here celebrating the freedom fighters that participated in the Freedom Summer Project, but also those freedom fighters of today. So I'm really excited to see a lot of young faces in the crowd. In the summer of 2007, it was 3 a.m. in the morning, and I had grown up undocumented in New York City. I'm originally from Ecuador and came with my family, my parents and my brother, at the age of 13 in 1998. And on that summer, I really felt the implications and the deep implications of being in this country undocumented. I was sleeping, and at 3 in the morning, I was woken up by a call from a friend who had been traveling on an Amtrak train going to Chicago for a meeting that we were organizing for immigrant youth to advocate for the DREAM Act. Raise your hand if you have heard of the DREAM Act. Okay, cool. I don't have to go into explaining that. But the DREAM Act it's a bill that was introduced in 2001 that aims at providing a pathway to citizenship for young immigrants so that they can go to school, have protection of deportation, et cetera. And many of us started organizing when we were in high school. And my friend Walter, as he was heading to this meeting, to this national meeting that we had been organizing, he was, the train, when it stopped in Buffalo in upstate New York, immigration customs enforcement officers came into the train because they could go into the train, or if you're driving, and if you're if you're like basically 500 miles close to the border, they can ask you for your citizenship papers. And so everybody in the train, especially those that were male of color, were asked for their citizenship papers. And Walter was one of them. And he was undocumented, just like me. And he was put in a detention center in upstate New York, and he was being processed for immediate deportation. Now, Walter had grown up here just like me, came here when he was 11 years old. And when I got that call at 3 a.m. and I was told that he was in deportation proceedings and detained, I deeply felt the fear and also a lot of disempowerment of not being able to do anything faced with the situation of losing someone I really care for and I love. But that was also the moment where I realized the power of organizing, because Walter was able to be released after 5 days out of the detention center because all of the young people that had been planning to meet in Chicago organized our communities, engaged legislators, senators, Congress members, members of the labor community, of the faith community, and we made calls and we just sent letters, and we went up to the detention center, and we were very clear that we were not going to let our friend Walter be sent to a country that he didn't know. And we were able to keep Walter. And that was the moment where, I was kind of like dating, like social justice work, like in and out, not really in. Yeah, do you feel me? Yeah, who has gone through that experience? Yeah, raise your hand, raise your hand.
They stopped walking.
No shame, right? But that was the moment where I said, I'm going to commit to this, because organizing works, and organizing saved my friend, and I know that it would also save me and my family. And so I started organizing at that time with many of the students that were engaged in trying to get Walter out of the detention center. And really, it became more than our stories, more than the dreams that we had about going to college. We realized that it was the immigration laws were set up in a way where our communities were living and are living still in complete fear of being separated, of being deported when you're driving, when you're going to school, like Walter when he was traveling to Chicago. And that is why I'm committed to the work that I do and why I work with other young leaders across the country to start United We Dream, which is the largest national immigrant youth-led organization in the country. And we have been advocating for the DREAM Act, for immigration reform, and other immigration policies at the state and national levels. But as the time has passed, what you have seen is that the story of Walter, it's not an isolated story. This story of deportation, it's not, it just happened in this train one time. We are now talking about over 2 million people that have been deported, given the current laws. As we speak and engage in this conversation in this panel, today over 1,000 people are going to be deported. And that means over 1,000 families that are going to be separated. Children that are going to lose their dads or moms, or wives that are going to lose their husbands. And that's why United We Dream and the broad coalition of immigrant rights organizations, but not only immigrant rights organizations, as Carmen was sharing with us, it's been so empowering to be working particularly on this issue in the last 3 years and see how much of a strong coalition we've been able to build. Because we don't only have immigrant families and immigrant students and immigrant workers advocating for a change in the laws, but we also have the faith community. We also have the labor community. And last year we saw a big engagement of the business community, the iTech community with Facebook and other companies joining this fight. And really the journey that we're walking through together is changing the law so that we can keep families together, because right now deportations are the real pain in the immigrant community, but also so that we are able to empower immigrant workers to have rights in the workplace, which is going to benefit ultimately all workers, right? Because right now immigrant workers have no protection either. And ultimately, we're here to build a movement for full equality and dignity for our communities. So we have been fighting for immigration reform, and we saw the last year we were able to build such a strong movement, not only through the victory of the Deferred Action Program, which Heather talked about, which was a campaign that was led by immigrant youth, grassroots campaign, that advocated the Obama administration to stop deporting young people, and we won in 2012. And folks, some people may say, it only impacted young people. This is really big. This is the most significant victory that the immigrant community has seen since 1986. So the 2012 DACA program was a huge victory for the immigrant community, but we know that even though people like me, right, young people that grew up here, and others, even though we are protected from deportation, our parents are still at risk. My mom and my dad are still going to work and driving my brother to school, and they can't have driver's licenses because our state does not issue driver's licenses to undocumented people, and they have to drive and work with the fear that they could be picked up by Immigration Customs Enforcement one day. So our fight, even after DACA, was not over, and we came back together with a broader coalition and the entire immigrant rights movement. And also, we saw the power of Latinos engaging in civic participation and coming out to the polls in the last presidential election, which really pushed immigration reform to the top of the agenda and really led to a successful outcome in the Senate when we were able to get comprehensive immigration reform passed last year. But now we have seen a stallment in the House, and all we're hearing from Republicans, and just this week, a Republican from the House came out and said that the president should stop the Deferred Action Program and should be deporting all of the young people that benefited from the program. So those are the only intentions and the kind of leadership that we have seen from the Republican Party. But that doesn't mean that we have to stop in trying to and pushing for and organizing our communities to get legislation passed, because that is the one permanent solution that our community needs. And currently, United We Dream and the rest of the movement is also focusing on stopping the outrageous and out of control number of deportations, which is why we are advocating for the president to expand administrative relief so that also families can be protected from deportation. And we don't have thousands of cases that come to our organization that say, my mom was just deported, what do I do? Can you help me? Or my dad was just detained. So these are the stories and these are the cases that keep me grounded in this work and that keeps this movement really with a lot of fuel to continue to build, not only with our community, but with the rest of the community, because keeping families together and creating equal opportunities and treating people with dignity, it's what America is about. Thank you.
He already gave you an introduction and
Oh, good.
described you as a
So
national
they know who I
treasure.
am. Horace Bond, that's right. And I'm the kind of speaker who likes to have his speeches written out. In 1961, when Dr. King addressed the Fourth Constitutional Convention of the AFL-CIO, he spoke about the unity of purpose
What? Can't hear.
between the labor movement and the movement for civil rights. He said, our needs are identical with labor's needs: decent wages, fair working conditions, livable housing, old age security, health and welfare measures, conditions in which families can grow, can have education for their children, and respect in their community. That is why Negroes support labor's demands and fight laws which curb labor. That is why the labor hater and labor baiter is virtually always a twin-headed creature spewing anti-Negro epithets from one mouth and anti-labor propaganda from the other. The duality of interest of labor and Negroes, King said, makes any crisis which lacerates you a crisis from which we bleed. And we stand on the threshold of the second half of the 20th century, a crisis confronts us both. Now, he spoke then about a duality of interest between labor and Negroes, and he did not mention the undocumented. We believe if he were speaking today, he would. But the crisis he spoke of then was and is a crisis for the freedom movement and a crisis for the movement of working women and men, and a crisis for the hardworking millions who want to join us as citizens. Despite impressive increases in the number of black people holding public office, despite our ability now to sit, read, ride, and vote, and attend school in places that used to bar black faces, in some important ways, non-white Americans face restrictions more difficult to attack now than in all the years that went before. Labor unions membership has plummeted from 35% of workers in the 1950s to about 11% of the workforce today. In 1974, the average American CEO made 34 times as much as the average American worker. By 1995, it was 179 times as much, and it's even higher now, recalling the bitter words of Victor Hugo that there was always more misery in the lower classes than there was humanity in the upper classes. Those years were what these years now promise to be, a kind of a festive party thrown for America's rich. Then the middle class had to get by on 2 paychecks. Median family income was stagnant, and the percentage of young families who own their own homes went down for the first time since the Depression. Savings and investment were down. More Americans were working longer hours at lower pay. And for those Americans whose skins are brown or black, the poverty rate went up while median family income went down. Poverty for black and Hispanic senior citizens went up. Children who were poor got even poorer. In the late 1960s, 3/4 of all black men were working. By the end of the 1980s, only 57% had a job. In 1968, the Kerner Commission, appointed by President Johnson to investigate the causes and prescribe the cures for the riots of 1967, concluded that white racism was the single most important cause of continued racial inequality in income, housing, employment, education, and life chances between whites and blacks. But Lyndon Johnson was succeeded in 1968 by Richard Nixon. Nixon pursued a Southern strategy, which used race to leech white voters away from the Democrats. Republicans have used race as a wedge ever since. Within a few short years, the growing number of blacks and other minorities and women pushing for entry into and power in the academy, the media, business, government, and other traditionally white male institutions created a backlash in the discourse over race. The previously privileged majority exploded in angry resentment at having to share space with the formerly excluded. Opinion leaders began to reformulate and redefine the terms of the discussion. No longer was the Kerner Commission's description of the problem acceptable. Any indictment of white America could be abandoned, and the kind of Susan Smith defense was adopted. Black people did it to the country, did it to themselves. Black behavior, not white racism, became the reason why whites and blacks and browns lived in separate worlds. Racism retreated and pathology advanced. The burden of racial problem solving shifted from racism's creators to its victims. The failure of the lesser breeds to enjoy society's fruits became their fault alone. In a kind of nonsensical tautology, we heard again and again, these people are poor because they are pathological because they are poor. Just as the movement King led began to win access for black workers to industrial jobs and organized labor, the jobs went offshore and labor declined in power and influence. Forgotten in the modern wave of inaugurations of new black mayors was the plight of blue-collar blacks. Plans to use the market system to revive the ghetto were embraced by a generation of politically connected black entrepreneurs, and their cause gained ascendancy. Black elites joined white elites at the feeding trough. We've all seen the results: the national nullification of the needs of the needy, the gratuitous gratification of the gross and the greedy, the practice of the politics of impropriety, prevarication, pious platitudes, and the triumph of self-righteous swinishness. Once again, want me to repeat that?
Yes.
Okay. We've all seen the results: the national nullification of the needs of the needy, the gratuitous gratification of the gross and the greedy, the practice of the politics of impropriety, prevarication, pious platitudes, and the triumph of self-righteous swinishness. Once again, Martin King's words, delivered 3.5 decades ago, speak to us today. He said then, differences have been contrived by outsiders who seek to impose disunity, by dividing brothers because of the color of their skin has a different shade. I look forward confidently to the day when all who work for a living will be one with no thought of their separateness, just as Negroes, Jews, Italians, or any other distinctions. King lost his life supporting a garbage worker strike in Memphis. The right to decent work at decent pay remains as basic to human freedom as the right to vote. He's not the only soldier missing from the freedom fight. He didn't march from Selma to Montgomery by himself. He didn't speak to an empty field at the March on Washington. There were thousands marching with him and before him, and thousands more who did the dirty work that preceded the triumphant march. Black Americans really didn't just march to freedom, and we didn't march alone. We worked our way to civil rights through the difficult business of organizing, knocking on doors one by one, registering voters one by one, creating a community organization block by block, financing the cause of social justice dollar by dollar, building a statewide movement town by town, creating an interracial coalition nationwide. We marched with an army of people who did not look like us, but we welcomed them to our side. Yesterday's movement succeeded because the victims became their own best champions. When Rosa Parks refused to stand up on a Montgomery bus, when Martin King stood up to speak, mass participation came to the movement for civil rights. In the same way, the labor movement was built on sacrifice, hard work, and organizing. What we did in the civil rights movement was to tell the truth. William Cullen Bryant was right when he said, "Truth crushed to earth will rise again." And James Russell Lowell was right when he declared, "Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown stands God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own." We have to get back to the difficult business of organizing, of creating coalitions, keeping watch above our own. When I entered the labor force more than 5 decades ago, there were 5 workers making contributions to the Social Security system for every retiree. Of course, I can't tell who they were, but their names were likely Carl, Ralph, Bob, Steve, and Bill. When I retire, there are only going to be 3 workers paying in the system for every retiree, and there's a good chance their names will be Kwanzaa, Maria, and Jose. We need to ensure that they have the best futures, the best education, the best health care, the best jobs they possibly can. Thank you.
Well, certainly it's clear from what everyone has said about why we need each other, and that there has been a history of integration, coordination, and support for each of the movements. I wanted to pose a few questions to you on the panel, take about 10 or 15 minutes for that, and then open it up and get your questions and comments on these same themes. So the first question I've got is really a contrary one to the vision that you've provided. Well, you've talked about how we all need each other and how we all work together. What about the tensions that often arise between social change movements, either fostered by opposition, who has an interest in keeping us divided and apart and down, or by historic concerns and preconditions, preconsiderations that we've had in our own minds, or even competition for scarce resources. So what have you done? What are some ways to deal with these kinds of divisions that have occurred and may occur in the future?
I definitely think through this job and through other jobs, I've seen a lot of contention, perceived contention between the Black community and others. So Black people and the LGBTQ community, Black people and the Latino community. And I actually think that the right does an incredible job dividing our communities, and I think that we need to use the same mediums that they use in order to let people know that there's change that's happening. And so there have been two examples I've seen of that. One, when I worked at the NAACP, there was always this notion that Black people across the board didn't like LGBTQ people. And so one of the things that we did when we worked at One Nation Working Together, because we were working with civil rights and we were working with the LGBT community, we made sure that our national field director, Reverend White, attended the meetings of the LGBTQ community. I mean, not only was he a reverend, so he's like the target demographic of people that are supposed to, dislike the LGBT community, but, our own president at the time, Ben Jealous, felt very strongly about breaking these ties down. And so one of the things that it eventually did, just the going to the meetings and actually publicizing to our members at the NAACP, this is a community we care about. I feel in my heart, I know it later led to, a very strong move by the NAACP to say, as an organization, we stand for this community. And I would say, another thing that I've seen is this tension around racial profiling. Oftentimes, especially when the Trayvon Martin and the Zimmerman case came down, people acted as if it was just the Black community that felt very strongly about this. But America was upset about what happened with George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin. So one of the things that we did, because I work with a group called the Black Youth Project, is we went back to labor. We went back to the Latino organizations. We went back to the Asian organizations and said, where are your press releases? Where are your press releases saying that the labor movement is outraged that this has happened, that Asians, that Latinos, that we are all being affected by these issues? So I think that if we use the same medium, using radio, using the internet, using social media, whether we're using television or not, we need to make sure that our message is out there and that when people see us, they don't see us divided, they see us together. And in the back room, if we need to have the knockout, drag-out fight, then we have those conversations in the back room.
Let me tell you a story about the NAACP. I was chairman of the NAACP for 11 years. The chairman is elected every year. He or she has to get reelected every year. And I served as chairman for 11 years. And during those 11 years, I was a big supporter of marriage equality. But I never asked the board to recommend it. And the reason I didn't ask, and probably a cowardly reason, was I thought the board would vote no. And I would rather they had no position than a bad position. So when people said, I'm going to bring this up, I say, no, not now. Wait, do it some other time. So after 11 years, I stopped being the chairman. Someone else took my place. And a couple of years after that, I'm sitting at a board meeting, and the NAACP has 64 board members. Don't look like that. A lot of organizations have more. And I'm sitting at a board meeting, and someone about 2 or 3 people down from me stood up and said, I recommend that we support marriage equality. And I thought, oh, no, this is a bad idea because they'll say no. And then we'll be the organization that opposes marriage equality. But before I could get up and say no, somebody said, I second that. And I thought, wow, some other person actually had the bravery to second that. And then somebody said, all in favor, let it be known by saying aye. And they said, aye. The majority of them said aye. And I'll tell you what that majority was. We had a man on the board who was a big homophobe, an awful homophobe, just a terrible homophobe. And he was not there. It was the first time I remember him not being there. And I think 2 other people were absent, so that meant there were 61 people present. And I think we voted 60-1 to support marriage equality. Wow. Well, I was just thunderstruck. I could not imagine this was happening. I was happy, of course, that this was happening, but I couldn't imagine that it was happening. And I realized that I had underestimated my colleagues' ability to think about things as they ought to be thought about. I had underestimated their feelings about this. I had underestimated them as men and women. And I was just flabbergasted, happy as I could be, but flabbergasted that it happened. So lesson here is don't underestimate other people.
And building on what you just shared with us, Julian, for United We Dream, in my experience within the immigrant rights movement, it's been about listening and building relationships, and really having conversations that were really, it gets to reveal that you have a lot more in common than what you think. United We Dream came together to work on immigration, the DREAM Act, which impacted young people in particular. And I'm going to share just a quick story on this, because we had one of our members who once said, you know, I'm undocumented, but I have to come out of 2 closets. One, you know, revealing my status that I'm undocumented, but the other one that I'm queer and identify with the LGBTQ community. And, you know, for us, even though we had been organizing for a while, it was the first time that we were faced with, oh, right, how come we didn't think about the fact that many of our young members are probably, you know, have other identities, identify with other issues that we haven't really raised. And we did not create a space to have that conversation within United We Dream, within the organization, until 2 years later, when we engaged just in a conversation like today, and we had more than 20 young leaders that in that workshop stood up and said, I'm undocumented and I'm also queer, and I'm so thankful that I have this space to say that. And that's when it was very clear to us that we couldn't be fearful of the fact that we also had this fear that in the Latino community, you know, that LGBTQ folks were not going to be accepted, that the faith groups were not going to work with us anymore. But what we realized at that moment is that we needed to embrace the different experiences that our members had, and that we could work through those experiences and build coalitions and with the groups that we already work with, like in the labor and the faith community, and build new ones, like with the LGBTQ community. And the last 2 years for United We Dream has been a wonderful experience to work with national and local LGBTQ organizations that have joined our fight for immigration reform, for stopping deportations. And in very similar ways, that last story I will share is that I never thought myself of the crisis that we have with deportation in similar ways as I think of, you know, the school-to-prison pipeline and incarceration that many communities of color face. And it wasn't until I started talking to friends and colleagues within other communities of color that have been working on this issue that it became the links between our struggles and how both of our communities and all of our communities of color have been criminalized in many ways, that was what brought us together. And that's what I actually organically created a group of us now working on a project called Freedom Side that is bringing young, that is bringing youth-led organizations of color, immigrant, African-American, and others to work on the issues that we've realized have an impact and have also the same root and we're all trying to get there.
And it's also true that the trust built across organizations and across constituencies by working together then can get translated for working on each other's issues, and so there's a shared interest. So the bond is both the moral bond, the personal bond, and also a self-interest bond, which we see just as one example around the fight for 15 as an increased minimum wage. The faces and many of the leaders in that fight, though of all races and colors, is substantially African American and Latino. And many of those bonds were made through backgrounds of learning the struggle from the civil rights movement, largely on the basis of the original civil rights movement or the earlier civil rights movement here, as well as the immigration reform fight. And many of those same people are emerging as the leaders then in this shared struggle on the fight for the minimum wage, so our struggles can converge. I actually want to ask, though, about what we do in this moment when we seem to be pushed back so much on so many issues, and that we're facing a kind of retrenchment. How do you look at building the alliances to deal with sometimes a very depressing situation? On immigration reform, the year deadline is coming up, and there's not action in the House. On civil rights, we've been hearing the story after story, whether it's voting rights or education, where there's a pushback, and certainly on labor rights, we see a pushback going on there. So what are the words of, what do you think can be done, particularly for building the coalition and the alliances that can move us out of this period? What are some, give us some rays of hope.
Yeah, Julian Bond.
Well, I think as with any other attempted building coalition, you have to do the little things and the big things. The little things, I think, most of us do, organizationally at least. For example, the heads of the NAACP typically go to the conventions of Hispanic groups and speak to them and invite their heads to come to our convention and speak to them. So we try to build some understanding that this person or this woman or this man is head of this group, and we want them to know us and we want to know them. That's a little something, you know. It takes a couple of hours for the person to come and go and make some remarks and pledge coalition that he or she is working for coalition, those little things. The bigger things are actually working together. Many years ago, I went to Texas to make a speech. I don't remember the town I was in, and I'm sitting on the platform with the city fathers, most of whom are white, and a couple of Latinos, a couple of black people, and most of them white men who were city councilmen and so on. And I'm sitting next to this black guy, and I said, do you know these Hispanic people? He said, no, I never saw them before today. I said, what's the breakdown here, black and Hispanic and white? He said, well, about a third black, about a third Hispanic, and about a third white. I said, well, then if the Hispanics and the black people got together, they would have a majority, wouldn't they? He said, I never thought about that. Well, you know, you have to think about things like that and then work on things like that and make them happen. I wish I remember the name of that town. I could find out what the leadership in the town looks like right now, but I bet it looks a lot different than it used to look when I was there 20 or 30 years ago.
You know, it's funny because I kind of live and die by the Midwest Academy's, you know, rule of thinking. And there's two things I thought of when you said that, Heather. One, I know that coalitions play to the center on tactics. But two, if we're going to win things, then we have to stop playing to the center on tactics. And we need to actually have tactics against targets that take them outside of their experience. Because at this point, having the same rally or march, doing it the same way that we've been doing it, our targets are not affected by us anymore. They're not nervous by us anymore. They're not scared of us anymore. And that's the reason why North Carolina is trying to systematically take down Moral Monday, because they decided we're not just going to do the one big march once a year and then we're going to come back again the next year. They said, no, we're just going to come back every Monday. We're going to take you outside of your experience. We're not just going to have people here from North Carolina. We're going to bring in people from all over the country that care about this issue. So for me, you know, and I'm definitely, you know, it's funny because every time I see Heather, she's always asking me to do some tactic I'm like, oh, you know, you want us to get arrested? Where? But to me, the only way for them to actually take the work that we are trying to do more seriously is if we do something that's going to be different. And whether that's different for us, whether that's different for them. But I do think that as a movement, we've got to get more comfortable being uncomfortable.
I mean, I think that just to build on what Carmen just shared, you know, just this week, there was the news that the House Republicans and you know, Boehner as leadership is planning to file a lawsuit on all of the administrative action that the president has taken on a variety of issues of, you know, our different movements. He signed administrative actions on student debt, on minimum wage, recently on the LGBTQ discrimination at the workplace. And the immigrant rights community right now is pushing for administrative action on deportations. So one that I think we as movements have gotten more creative to get to win the change that we want to see in our communities. But what we also see is the opposition, right? Really trying to fight back the change that we're creating. And that lawsuit, or that threat of that lawsuit, it's a threat to all of our movements together. So we are here to gain if we stand together to fight back on those kinds of efforts. And I think that for me, that's the bottom line of coalition building and the importance of bringing all of our movements together.
Sounds good. Nice. What we would like to do now is sort of open it up to you. I think that before the recordings, we need to ask people to come up to the microphone. And so, sir, I know if you've got your hand up, if you come on up to the microphone. We'll take a few questions, answer a few questions, and then we may take several questions in a unit and ask everyone to answer them. The session ends at 5:45, and about 5 minutes to that, we'll ask each of the panelists to make a closing minute or so remark.
Heather, do you have any instructions for us? Like 2 minutes or 3 minutes, no more?
I'd actually ask
I'm
that
not
you,
going to talk more than 2
that you
minutes.
try to take, let's see, we've got about a half hour. Thank you so much, by the way. That was a good organizer there. Maybe if you try and aim for about a minute worth of a question or a comment. And you can take either one, try and aim for a minute of a question or a comment, and we'll give you a little oomph on it. But we will try and keep you to it so we can get through all the comments and questions. And if you'd give your name, thank you so much. You know, one of the reasons that groups are so much better than just functioning on your own is they fill in when you've forgotten the fundamentals. If you'd say who you are, where, if there's an organization you're working with, and then what your relationship was, if you've got one, to Mississippi Summer.
Okay, I've known, of course, Julian Bond for the last 50 years.
And your name?
My name is John Dew. I'm an attorney from Florida, and I came up here Mississippi in the spring of 1964 to meet Bob Moses at Dillard University and followed him to Macomb. And the next day I was arrested by Don Jones because I was speeding, who is son of the head of the White Ku Klux Klan in Southwest Mississippi. But that's another story. I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk to Ms. Berkeley. I have a question. Julian is right. The NAACP has supported the rights of all Latin-speaking organizations, historically, particularly in Dade County. We have a Jobs with Justice with SCIU, which is interethnic. But the problem is this. This is all on a political ground. And now I spend most of my time in Atlanta, and Atlanta's changed. The new underclass is the Mexican American. And they don't teach Spanish in Fulton County schools.
And so the question for Carmen.
Yes. My question to Carmen is this. Once upon a time, in the life of the ACLU, they had a program supporting community unions. We need the support of institutions like the AFL-CIO so that we can develop the inter-ethnic communication on the local level. And we need the resources to do that. Can that happen again?
I think so. And I say, we actually have a couple of things going on. First, coming out of our convention in 2013, there was a much larger emphasis on how are we going to do strategic work with community. So we started doing that we hired 4 community engagement folks that are in the South, the West Coast, the East Coast, and some other region that I'm forgetting right now. But they're actually working in different cities. Atlanta is actually specifically one of them to identify what are the challenges that are happening within the community and how can the labor movement actually support them. So one of the things I was alluding to is we chose 5 cities in the South, Atlanta, Miami, Orlando, Houston, and Dallas, to actually pilot this program. It's called our 5 Cities program. And so for us, it's going to be about voting rights, mass incarceration, citizenship. What are the issues that folks are dealing with in those cities, and how can we come together? And also, we have 6 constituency groups that work with Black folks, Latinos, Asians, women, and the LGBTQ community that are also working a lot more now to identify what those challenges are and figure out what we can do to make change.
But again, I'm not talking about just political issues. I'm talking about intergroup
And I think she's
relationships.
trying to respond on that, and what I'd suggest is it may be that if Carmen's willing to stay a little after, that some of this may need more specific comments. But I think that was a broad frame about building those community unions, and there are new models from Lane in California to a whole network of new models of organization, not only based on collective bargaining, but on community alliances. Remember?
Like organizing in the South?
No, it's like groups like Lane.
Alt labor, yes, alt labor, alternative forms of labor. We call it ALT labor.
Thanks very much. Thank you, and thank you for your many years of service yourself.
And the
and
young kids that carry on. I'm tired.
The reason we put together this panel in part is, look at these young kids who are carrying on. It's pretty amazing.
I'm tired too. I'm Bill Light, and I work with an organization called We Are People here in Santa Fe, New Mexico now. I alluded to this morning a little bit. I just wanted to make the point because it's really relevant to this last question of, okay, the different organizations need to work together better. They need to establish relationships with each other personally and so on. But what about? And our feeling is it's got to get to the roots of the problem, the actual issues of the environment and workers' rights and so on and so forth. They're like the leaves, but there's the tree that is the real problem, and that is plutocracy. That is the fact that our government is being run by money. Government of money, by money, and for money. And so, yes, we all need to continue working on our issues, but the thing we might be able to get together on is also putting a bit of energy in this direction of the plutocracy.
Then what are we going to do about money in politics? The thoughts here? Thoughts around the table? You know, there's a group that was initiated by the Communications Workers of America and Larry Cohen, the extraordinary president there, with the NAACP and Sierra Club as the initial group, and now there are hundreds of groups, I think, in it. And it has a three-part agenda. And one part is getting money out of politics as the prime effort. The second is changing the rules of the Senate against the filibuster and ensuring that you can then move things like move justices so that the judicial process can move along. And the third is a civil rights and voting rights agenda, because money and voting rights are intimately tied, as it's tied to what are the rules for advancing some of these nominees that have been placed. And that was initiated by labor, civil rights, and environment together. So it's just one example of how we're moving. Any other comments from the? Well, thank you for the question. Plutocracy.
Hello, my name is Patricia Ice, and I'm the legal project director with the Mississippi Immigrants' Rights Alliance here in Jackson. And I could talk for a long time, but I won't because I know that the time is limited. The Mississippi Immigrants' Rights Alliance started in 2000, and Bill Chandler there was the founder, the lead founder of it. And since we've been in existence, there have been more than 200 anti-immigrant bills that have gone through the state legislature here in Mississippi. And with us as leaders, this organization, we have defeated most of those bills. I would say if we've defeated mostly all of them. The only, and we did that with the help mainly of black legislators here. And it took us years to develop these relationships, et cetera. But what I would like to know is if you, Christina, I'm really excited that you're here. And I would like you to come back here and lead a discussion with the Latino community and the African American community so that we can build stronger coalitions here in Mississippi. Because we have a lot of people in the African American community who are not quite sure about this alliance of African Americans and Latinos. And we're sure of the alliance, and we want you to come back to help us build upon what we already have.
Wonderful invitation.
I'll be more than
I'll give
happy
you
to
my
come
card.
back. Yes.
So it sounds like a follow-up conversation, and get out your calendars. And by the way, Christina flew down only for this panel because she's flying back for a national board meeting of United We Dream. It just shows the kind of level of commitment she has to make this work.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Eduardo. I am coming from Georgia with the Dreamers and undocumented student at Freedom University. Thank you, thanks. So basically, I just wanted to kind of make a comment and definitely, I guess, ask the question to the Freedom 50 that are here right now. In Georgia, we've been battling anti-immigrant laws, every single day. We are on the streets, the Dreamers, fighting for, to stop deportations, to, provide undocumented students with a way to go to college. But then we have these policies in Georgia, like 416, that prohibit undocumented students from applying to the top 5 universities in the state of Georgia. And this is basically taking us 50 years back in history to when African American students were also banned from the same 5 universities. I just want to hear, more than support each other, I think, that there's a clear understanding, and especially in this space, that the ones that should be, that we need to support are the ones that are being affected by these issues. So how can we better be able to help, let's say, the undocumented community to build, to have capacity to fight, the anti-immigrant bills, to have the capacity to come out and say no to the things that are going to affect them, because we know that there might be like a lot of good, thoughts and good, will to help them. But I just think that, we have to, the first step is giving them the capacity to fight their own fight. So I want to hear your thoughts on this, how can we give the capacity to every single struggle to fight for their own, issues?
I think he also wanted to hear from the veteran. Yeah. I mean, I think that. Thank you. No problem. I mean, I think that for what we have seen with United We Dream and a lot of the dreamer groups across the country is the effectiveness of social movement building and organizing that is led by those that are affected by the issues, right? And I take a lot of pride in sharing the story of how we were able as young people to win the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. When advocacy had been going on for immigration reform for so many years, it wasn't until young people, undocumented, came out publicly, risking deportation to lead the movement and to lead us to that victory. So we have that example. And what we have, when I started organizing for undocumented students and families and workers, I was really afraid of coming out. And there were other 7 young people with me in 2005. And now we have 52 affiliates in 26 states. We just had our national congress with over 500 dreamers. That's the capacity that we've built in the last 10 years. Now, I'm not saying we're done. I'm saying that should give us hope for the work that we need to continue to do and developing the leadership of you and others across the country that will continue to transform politics locally and nationally.
Thank you, thank you. I just want to give a little bit more background on Freedom U because I know somebody was asking.
Just very briefly.
Briefly.
Yeah.
So basically the 416 policy bans undocumented students from the top 5 colleges. A little story is that a 16-year-old undocumented student, she came here when she was 3 years old. She has a 4.5 GPA. She lives 5 minutes away from the admissions office, yet she cannot apply to that university. So that's where Freedom University comes from.
By the way, just on the building capacity, within the immigration reform movement, it's also one of the reasons that the Alliance for Citizenship exists and helps people move on concerted, unified, coordinated campaigns. And I do have, I'll actually hand out someone there maybe. There's some flyers from the Alliance for Citizenship about the current demand, which is to call Congress, the Republican leadership, and tell them that we want a pathway to citizenship. But it also has information about the Alliance on it and what its position is. The other thing is that there are all sorts of training centers and organizations that are there to build support. The one I've been associated with is Midwest Academy. The website's midwestacademy.com. .org was a Christian academy, but it's just to not be confused with it. But it's, and both of these wonderful women actually went through it, so can speak to it. But there also are others. Wellstone Action is there for training on, especially on elections. The New Organizing Institute is there to train for how to become an online expert. And there are other efforts like that. And again, if you want to even discuss where to go, be glad to do it after the session. And also, it's clear you've got a lot to teach us and others. Thank you very much for what you're doing.
Hi, thanks for being here today. My name's Howard Winans. I'm a scholar and activist on race and racism issues based out of California. Just a very quick comment.
Speak right into the mic, because I'm not sure they can hear in the back. And then.
Okay, just a very quick comment. The event here is an event on continuity. The continuity of Freedom Summer today is very, very strong. And a lot of the comments have been about the link between civil rights and immigrants' rights. I think it's really important to recognize how much immigrant rights movements are linked to slavery and the legacy of slavery. That this country had fugitive slave laws. Well, we have tens of millions of fugitives in the country today. And this also points to incarceration and structural racism in other ways because as recent work by a woman named Alice Goffman called On the Run, a book called On the Run has shown, there's a whole structure, a whole system for making fugitives, particularly out of young black men in the cities. So in this sense, there is a tremendous historical continuity that we can organize around. My own work, very quickly, is work to use the university to consolidate our support in the university, which is a key institutional base for us, a key progressive base for us that's clear even here at Tougaloo, to use it as a base for pointing out and deepening awareness of this connection.
And we certainly appreciate the alliances between the academics and the organizing, which used to be, I think, much deeper and closer than it is these days. Was there a comment anyone wanted to make about the immigration and slavery? Because I know there's been such a connection between actually sex trafficking, when you're undocumented and you come in and you're beholden to someone else, then in effect you can become the slave in one way or another. Any comments people want to make?
Hi, Heather. My name is Teresa Elamine. I'm with the Southern Anti-Racism Network. We came here for this 50th celebration with a small delegation from our board. And my aha moment was in a classroom at Tuskegee Institute in 1965, Gene Wiley's classroom, when Stokely Carmichael came, and after talking to us about the majority black counties, Macon County, Lowndes County, and all that, then he said, I'm with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and I'm for Black Power. Will you join me? And everybody in the classroom, I think, raised their hand. And so he was a great recruiter, wasn't he? And so from there, you know, we did a lot of things out in the Lowndes County and other places. But I think the really importance of that for me is that 1 year shaped who I am today. And the culmination of that 1 year was coming back into Atlanta to work on the Julian Bond campaign special election, the nitty-gritty, the nitty-gritty. And so
what I'd ask now is, because we're going to start wrapping up, I'm going to ask
Okay.
each person to speak, and then we'll respond overall. And if you raise the point you'd like to
Yeah,
really
well,
emphasize.
I want to push the strategic thinking question. Over these years, I'm really convinced that the biggest challenge is finding people who are willing to think for themselves in a bottom-up mass movement organizing mode. And after working in the labor movement for so many years because of the SNCC experience, at first when you start working as a union organizer, you know, what is happening, but I met some folks who helped me understand what it means to form democratic rank and file control unions. And so my thinking was always that way as we went out organizing. And at this point in life, I'm just a little bit feeling like Harry Belafonte at the SNCC 50th anniversary, and we're going to have a lot of 50th anniversaries over this next decade. And we'll be the 100th anniversary next year of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. So we're going to have a lot. The 60s.
And so really, it's a question, so where is the emphasis on the bottom-up leadership?
Yeah, and I just want to say what, in terms of the kind of nostalgic thing that Harry Belafonte seemed to criticize us about in 2010 at the SNCC 50th anniversary. He said, what in the world is wrong with y'all? What are you doing in the here and now? And those words are sticking with me and sticking with me. So I just want us to push the strategic thinking question.
I appreciate the question. We need the strategic thinking. It also honestly seems true that they are talking about organizing going on in the here and now. But that we're going to take all the last two comments, and then we'll ask each panelist to comment from the strategic thinking, bottom-up thinking, hear these two questions, and respond, and also with your final comment.
Hello, I'm Dania Martinez. I'm from Georgia, and I'm an undocumented student. I just want to say a comment to any activists older than us. I just started doing activism in Georgia, and I just want to tell you guys that these 3 days have been amazing because I learned so much from you guys. And we are launching a project called Freedom House, which is going to help undocumented students. We're going to help them apply for DACA, families getting separated, and it's just amazing, all your work. And oh my God, I'm going to cry. Thank you for all your work.
And thank you for your work. Thank you. You know, you should post the Freedom House information on the SNCC website, and I think if you give us that information to any of the staff, we'll be able to post it there. Thank you so much.
Yes, my name is Bill Chandler from here in Jackson, from the Mississippi Immigrant Rights Alliance. We call it MIRA. I wanted to basically talk about something that Brother Julian was talking about Texas. And I think maybe the town was Houston, Texas, where you were at, because that's the breakdown of, at that time, of the population. But the name of the game really is power. And when we started MIRA, we were responding to a lot of incidents, but at the same time, we saw here in Mississippi that the demographics, if immigrants came into Mississippi and the African American community continued to grow as it is now, and the progressive community is beginning, the white community is becoming a little bit progressive, that combination of 37 to 40% African American, 10 to 15% of the white population leaning progressive, and with more Latinos moving in, we would have a majority here in Mississippi to make change. We saw that, and Jim Evans, who I think at least one of you know, is the president of our organization. State Representative Jim Evans also works for the AFL-CIO and is one of the leaders in the caucus. But we saw the possibilities of what could happen. On the other side, the white oligarchy also saw the same thing. And if you look at the southern states with the changing in demographics that are happening, there's a tremendous potential for significant change here if we can continue to grow the community, continue to go through naturalization, get people registered, and start building political power in the states. The South is really going to be where it's at. And this is what we saw, and this is what we're working to do, is to build the community so that we can have that kind of a coalition working so that we can make change here in Mississippi.
Thank you so much, Bill. I know why your name was called before and why the reputation of your organization has actually run very wide around the United States. So I thank you so much. I do want to ask if people want to make comments to the last questions and a final wrap-up comment, and then I've got just a couple of announcements that you'll want to hear about what happens next before we end.
You know, when I was listening to you, Teresa, speaking, and you said your aha moment was when you were younger. And I think that many of us were politicized or were brought into this movement when we were younger. And we also know that most social justice movements are being moved by young people. And so in the work that, you know, I do with labor, I am oftentimes faced with the intergenerational conversation of we're working with baby boomers, people from Gen X, and millennials who all think very differently about this work. And so one of the things that I would say to, you know, I'm a millennial, I'll be 29 on Saturday, and but what I would say is that we really have to make sure that we are empowering young people to have a voice within this space. Because I'll tell you the truth, oftentimes, and I've worked for big organizations and small organizations, as a young person, I've oftentimes felt left out, ostracized, felt like my voice was being diminished. People say things like, I want to give it over. You don't have to give it over. We can do this together. But I think that the development of young people and making sure that their ideas are at the forefront of the work that we are doing, that is really how we are going to move forward a progressive 21st century civil rights agenda. So I'm really happy you said that, sister.
You are a birthday gift to us. You got that?
Yeah, I got that. I actually had to make this similar comment than Carmen. My own experience with organizing comes from not only being directly affected by immigration laws, but also from the experience of organizing with young people around the country who are and have been the decision makers in all of the campaigns and all of the work that we have been doing. So for me, that model of organizing works, and it's the most effective model of organizing, not only young people directly affected by it, but also thinking about the investment of the leadership of young people. And I think here is the opportunity that we have as a generation of young people in terms of investing in all of the young leadership that will be changing our communities locally and nationally. It's a big investment. It's going to take a lot of work, and coalition building takes a lot of work. But being in this panel made me realize that all of that work, it's paying off. And it doesn't mean we're done. The work continues. But to leave from this conversation in a hopeful tone, demographics are changing. Yes. And there is a new majority forming. And it is up to us, the people in this room, and young people from all kinds of backgrounds to lead the way. And there's people like us and many of you here and outside of this room that are committed to invest in that leadership and that are committed to see the change that we want to see in the community. So that's the hope and that's our challenge.
I can't add anything to what we've already heard. This is exciting for me. I'm 74. Let's have a little applause for the 74-year-old. I'm 74 and really think that I have more before me, that coming to events like this, seeing people whom I've not seen for some time, meeting younger people like these two, this is a stimulating experience for me. I wouldn't have missed this for anything. Come away from it thinking, why don't I do this, or can I do that, or do that? These are just wonderful, wonderful occasions for me, and I hope it's the same for the rest of you, that you meet people and you learn from their experiences, you have something to offer them from your experience, you understand that you can do better than you're doing now. All of us can. Let's do it.
Yes.
We put together this panel to say how we need each other, and we have found ways to be coalitional, integrating our efforts, building the relationships, building on the self-interests, building our power. By the way, to the power question, there are going to be several civic engagement, voter mobilization issues. Here's for Bill. One I've got right here, NAACP is recruiting several hundred organizers to do voter registration and get out the vote work in specific districts to promote voter registration and then get out the vote to change the formula so that, in fact, we show our increased power. There is a similar effort that's going to be developed from the Alliance for Citizenship and many of the Freedom Summer, and from many other, Freedom Summer, Freedom Fall, and from many other immigration reform groups, as well as a mainstay of the power in building for election reform is usually from the labor movement. I'm going to make two short announcements and end with just a little comment. By the way, first, I guess just thank again for this panel. What an extraordinary panel. And both the wisdom of those who've been around with greater experience, all the 74 years. Yes. I do feel like I could listen to Julian Bond at any time and any place, and I constantly learn again and again, though I can't write fast enough to steal his phrases for my next talk. And then the youth who are the next generation, and it does give us hope and promise for that next generation. Two short announcements. We've heard that some of the Mississippi Summer vets would like to process and have a dialogue amongst themselves about what the experience meant And so just an announcement that sometime between 2 and 6 tomorrow, a space will be identified and it will be announced during tomorrow's plenary. So any vets who are interested in that, everyone's welcome. The other thing is that tonight there's a complimentary shuttle service provided for tonight's reception at the Mississippi Museum of Art, which is 380 South Lamar Street in Jackson. And the shuttles will begin to depart at 6 o'clock from the Wellness Center. And I understand that there's an art and photography exhibit from Freedom Summer and the Civil Rights Movement that's going to be in that museum.
Let me say something about that, Heather. This is a wonderful, wonderful art exhibit of photographers who came to Mississippi, many of them, with the exact purpose of recording what was going on. And you'll see pictures. Many of us have seen many, many pictures of movement activity. I think you watch this exhibit, you'll see pictures you've never seen before, and you'll just wonder at the skill and the excitement that these photographers brought to this. So go see it if you can.
And the shuttles will start leaving at the Wellness Center, and you'll have time to get there. The last, just thinking, this was on the workers' tier of the Freedom 50th conference. And so I thought, in talking about building our power, just to say the words from the great labor anthem and to apply it to this moment of solidarity forever, which says, when our unions' inspiration through our blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union, our union, civil rights, immigrant rights, labor rights, all together, our union makes us strong. You make us strong. Thanks for carrying on the legacy and the tradition. Viva!